often do you go through this little ritual?
Oh, every day.
Rainbows and...
It's not quite an Oscar, but for your wonderful work tonight.
Audrey Hepburn was not only a legendary Hollywood star, she was a timeless symbol of elegance, a woman who stood at the very top with iconic roles in Roman Holiday and Breakfast at Tiffany's. She had an Oscar, she had fame, she had the world at her feet. But then, at the very moment she could have held onto that spotlight forever, Audrey chose to leave Hollywood to do what mattered most to her, becoming a mother. The whole world remembers Audrey Hepburn as a legend, but the real story does not end there. Because after she passed the two sons she loved, most stepped into a battle no one ever expected. Not on a stage, but in a courtroom. And most painfully, Audrey Hepburn was gone. But the tragedy was not buried with her. It stayed behind, grew quietly, and then exploded inside her own family. What really happened to her two sons? And why did the name Audrey Hepburn, once tied only to beauty and elegance, become the source of a long and bitter conflict? And the truth is far more brutal than you could ever imagine. A childhood marked by poverty and hardship. People remember her for her clear eyes, her graceful presence, and a softness that seemed untouched by life's wounds. But behind that beauty was a childhood shaped by war hunger and a deep, lingering sense of insecurity throughout her teenage years. Audrey was born in 1929 in Brussels. Her father was British, her mother a Dutch aristocrat. But not long after that. My parents' divorce was the first shock I had to endure. I worshipped my father and missed him deeply from the day he left. When he cut off all contact, I felt completely hopeless. I was always jealous of others. I would come home and cry because my friends had fathers. My mother loved me very much, but she often could not show it. I had no one to comfort me every day. In 1939, when Audrey Hepburn was 10 years old, World War II entered one of its most brutal phases. Germany occupied the Netherlands, and her family faced countless upheavals. Those years under occupation left deep marks on both Audrey's body and mind. She continued going to school, continued studying ballet, still trying to maintain some sense of order in a life that was becoming increasingly deprived. By the winter of 1944 to 1945, the Netherlands entered the Hunger Winter, a historic famine that wiped out food supplies, left fuel almost non-existent, and forced people to survive on whatever scraps they could find through the cold months. It was during this time that Audrey suffered from severe malnutrition, anemia, and edema health effects that would stay with her for years to come. After the Netherlands was liberated in 1945, her passion for dance, once used in service of the resistance, brought Audrey back to England with a scholarship to the Rambert Ballet School. But after being told that her height and fragile physical condition would prevent her from becoming a top ballerina, she decided to try acting instead. And then, cinema opened a different path for her. From a struggling girl to a global screen icon, in 1951, Audrey Hepburn was not yet a name that made the world turn its head. At that time, she was just a young actress filming a small role in Monte Carlo Baby, when she was discovered by French writer Colette in the lobby of the Hôtel de Paris in Monte Carlo, who chose her for the lead role in the stage adaptation of her novel Gigi on Broadway. She received overwhelming praise. after the success of Gigi Audrey was cast as Princess Anne in Roman Holiday by William Wyler. The film's massive box office success launched her to the peak of fame, earning her an Oscar, a BAFTA, and a Golden Globe while firmly establishing her as a star. She also won a Tony Award for Best Actress that same year for the play Undine Audrey's charm, style, and captivating smile won over audiences, and she signed a 7-film contract with Paramount. Her collaborations with legendary directors like Billy Wilder, Blake Edwards, and Stanley Donen showcased her versatility and her seamless ability to move between comedy and drama, with performances marked by a unique blend of vulnerability and strength that made her characters feel both relatable and deeply endearing. While her later roles in films like Sabrina and Funny Face highlighted her acting talent, it was her role as Holly Golightly, a free-spirited young woman in the adaptation of Truman Capote's Breakfast at Tiffany's, that cemented Audrey Hepburn's status as a Hollywood icon and earned her a 4th Oscar nomination. The character's famous little black dress, accented by a striking pearl necklace and oversized sunglasses, became one of the most iconic fashion images of the 20th century, and in film history, a symbol of timeless elegance and allure inseparable from Hepburn herself. And just when the world believed Audrey Hepburn had reached the absolute peak, her heart was pulled into a relationship that was as beautiful as a movie and as painful as a curse. On-screen romance, a longing for motherhood, and a quiet chain of losses. It happened while she was filming Sabrina Hepburn, and Holden fell in love during production, leading Holden to agree to leave his wife and children for Hepburn. Audrey was a woman who longed deeply to have children, so when she discovered that Holden had undergone a vasectomy many years earlier, she felt completely devastated. Neither of them fully recovered from the breakup, and each went on to enter multiple relationships, while Hepburn's longing for a child led her into 2 very different marriages that both ended in divorce. Her first son and a turbulent marriage, Audrey had 1,000 choices at the door of marriage, yet she chose a man who would hurt her, betrayed by her husband for being too perfect. Yes, you did not hear that wrong. That is one of the most bitter ways to describe Audrey Hepburn's first marriage. Audrey Hepburn met her first husband, Mel Ferrer, at a dinner celebrating the premiere of Roman Holiday. At the time, Ferrer was a man who had already been divorced twice and had 4 children. He was 12 years older than Hepburn. But despite the age gap, she believed that being with an older man would offer her protection and a sense of safety. Although the media often claimed Mel was not worthy of Audrey, his maturity and attentiveness drew her in. They held their wedding in a small church by Lake Lucerne in Switzerland and shared a deeply passionate period together. Audrey Hepburn was deeply grateful for the care and attention her husband showed her. And then, in June 1960, she stepped into motherhood when her first son, Sean Hepburn Ferrer, was born in Switzerland, a country known for its peace and privacy, likely chosen intentionally by his parents to shield him from the harsh glare of public attention. Even though Audrey's fame had reached a global level, she had always valued privacy and wanted to protect those closest to her from the press. That protective instinct shaped Sean's early years as Audrey balanced the delicate line between maintaining her public image and giving her child a stable and secure upbringing. And then she made an even more shocking decision. Audrey stepped away from the spotlight to focus on her family. At the peak of her fame, she could have continued to capitalize on her cinematic success. But instead, she chose to prioritize the quiet, intimate moments that give parenthood its meaning. She immersed herself in her child's world, reading to him, playing with him, and taking him everywhere, nurturing a bond that might never have existed had she continued the demanding pace of a full-time Hollywood career. This period also gave Audrey the chance to reflect on her own childhood, the hardships of wartime, the lessons from her mother and those who guided her, and transform all of it into a warm, creative, and encouraging environment for raising her child. Even though she stepped away from acting, Audrey's love for art never faded. She found ways to bring culture and creativity into Sean's upbringing, exposing him to literature, music, dance, and theater. As Sean grew older, he carried not only his mother's brilliant on-screen legacy, but also the lessons shaped by those early years filled with deep care. Audrey's devotion built a foundation of emotional strength, creativity, and resilience that would stay with him throughout his life. However, her marriage was not truly happy. After marrying Ferrer, Audrey experienced moments of imbalance. Infidelity damaged their relationship. Mel and Audrey decided to end their 14-year marriage with an official divorce in 1968. Audrey always wanted to help Mel succeed in his career. Mel also wanted to become a world of his own for his wife, but things did not turn out as he had hoped. Aside from the issue of infidelity, Mel once admitted he could not bear being called Audrey's husband instead of by his own name. That quickly led to their collapse, and it would not be the only time her heart was crushed. Luca Dotti was born, opening the second chapter in Audrey's life. To ease her pain, she traveled around the islands of Greece, where she happened to meet and fall in love with Italian psychiatrist Andrea Dotti, marrying him within a year. At age 40, Audrey Hepburn gave birth to her second son, Luca Dotti. The arrival of Luca Andrea Dotti made Audrey devote even more of herself to motherhood, as she tried to give her children a nurturing environment far from the harsh gaze of the public. Audrey approached parenting with the same devotion, care, and elegance that had shaped her professional career. She balanced the complexities of raising two sons while building a home filled with warmth, creativity, and moral guidance. During this period, Audrey's work in Hollywood slowed down significantly. She no longer prioritized the constant demands of leading roles and international promotional tours, instead choosing selective projects that allowed her to remain present in film without sacrificing family life. Luca's early years, like those of his half-brother Sean Hepburn Ferrer, were shaped by a blend of privacy, cultural depth, and exposure to the arts. Growing up in Italy, he experienced the rhythm of European life, unhurried afternoons, journeys through places rich in history and culture, and an education steeped in intellectual curiosity. Audrey's devotion ensured that both of her sons could grow up with a sense of normalcy and a strong identity, even though their family name was tied to an extraordinary legacy. She deliberately protected Luca from excessive media attention, giving him the space to form his own character, interests, and ambitions without being weighed down by the pressures that often come with being the child of a global icon. In an open conversation with Town and Country last year, Luca Andrea Dotti shared a very personal view of his mother. Luca remembered his mother as a family woman who preferred staying home to care for her children and pets rather than posing on the red carpet. Her greatest dream in life was to become a mother. However, following the pattern of her previous marriage, her husband Dotti was heavily talked about in the press because of a series of rumors about his lifestyle, including relationships with younger women. And Audrey also suffered another miscarriage in 1974, while her husband showed no concern for his wife. By 1979, Dotti's affairs were being reported in the press. In the end, in 1982, Dotti and Audrey officially ended their marriage of more than 12 years. His brief affairs became bait for many tabloids, causing Audrey deep pain. But the strangest thing is that after all those broken pieces, Audrey Hepburn did not become bitter. Instead, she turned her private pain into compassion for millions of children out there. Audrey Hepburn and UNICEF's humanitarian legacy. If Hollywood was the place that turned Audrey Hepburn into a legend, then UNICEF was where the public saw the most beautiful part of who she was. On screen, Audrey was a symbol of elegance and ageless beauty. But in the final chapter of her life, she stepped away from the spotlight and went into the poorest places in the world, where children did not need a star, but someone willing to speak for their pain. That was when Audrey Hepburn was no longer just a film star. She became a humanitarian voice with real weight. What made that journey special was that it did not come from image obligations or a campaign to polish her name. Audrey had once been a child who survived war, who endured hunger, and who received relief after World War II. Because of that, when she stood before frail children in Africa or Asia many years later, she did not look at them as an outsider. She saw herself from many years earlier. UNICEF also emphasized this. Audrey understood what those children felt through her own real memories. In 1988, Audrey became a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador. This was a stage in life when many stars chose to enjoy their fame, but she chose commitment instead. Ethiopia was one of her first destinations, and also the place that showed most clearly how Audrey used fame as a tool to save lives. After that trip, she entered an intense cycle of media work. There were days when Audrey gave as many as 15 interviews just to force the world to look at child famine. She understood one thing: fame only truly has value when it brings attention to the place that most needs saving. From Ethiopia, Audrey continued to many other struggling regions such as Sudan, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Somalia, and Latin America. Wherever she went, she kept a very consistent approach. No grandstanding, no oversized words, no turning herself into the center. She listened, she observed, then used her credibility to tell the world what she had seen with her own eyes. People believed her because she was not performing. She was there to work. What matters most is that Audrey did all of this in the final stage of her life, when she could easily have lived as a celebrated icon in safety. But Audrey did not choose that peace. She chose to bring her body, already marked by so much loss, into harsh lands, just for the chance to help a few more children be seen, be helped, be allowed to keep living. That is why Audrey Hepburn's true legacy does not lie in the black dress from Breakfast at Tiffany's, nor in the pearls or the movie posters. Her greatest legacy lies in her love for children in the way she turned glamour into responsibility. But ironically, while Audrey was using the last years of her life to save others, her own body was quietly betraying her from within. Audrey Hepburn's final days. In late 1992, while many people still saw Audrey Hepburn as an unchanging symbol of elegance, her body had already begun sending very different signals. After her trip to Somalia with UNICEF, where she continued bringing her name to some of the hardest places on earth, Audrey returned suffering from severe abdominal pain. At first, no one thought it was the sign that the final chapter of her life had begun. The pain came and stayed, forcing Audrey to get checked. At that time, the family still hoped it was only a serious digestive problem that could be treated. But the more tests were done, the colder the truth became. Audrey was diagnosed with appendix cancer, a rare disease that is difficult to detect early. For a woman who had already lived through war loss, broken marriages, and harsh relief missions, this became the final battle she could not choose how to enter. The following weeks were filled with hospital stays, tests, and surgery. Audrey's family had to live in a state of clinging to hope, while gradually understanding that the situation was far more serious than they wanted to believe. The doctors moved forward with treatment, but then reality could no longer be avoided. The illness had gone too far. What could be done at that point was no longer about finding a cure, but about trying to keep her as comfortable as possible in the time she had left. This is the most painful part of Audrey Hepburn's story, because for so many years she appeared to the public as a woman in control of her life. But at that moment, all the fame, beauty, and light that had once surrounded the name Audrey Hepburn became powerless before a diagnosis that had come too late. What Audrey longed for then was not complicated at all. She did not ask for more time to return to the screen. She did not try to cling to the grand rituals of a movie legend. All she wanted was to return home to Switzerland, to be in her familiar space, to see the garden, the quiet rooms, the loved ones nearby. That wish sounds simple, but in those circumstances, it became a race against time. Audrey's health had become so fragile that putting her on a commercial flight was no longer really suitable. Those closest to her had to do everything they could to arrange for her to fly safely back to Switzerland. The woman who had moved through fashion capitals, the biggest film sets, and the most prestigious award ceremonies in the end, wanted only one final journey to go home. After returning to Tolochanas, Audrey almost disappeared from the public image people had known. The closer she came to death, the more she appeared as her most private self. No longer the face on a poster, no longer the symbol of the black dress, no longer the Hollywood star called by millions of fans. In those final days, Audrey was mostly a mother, a woman of the family, someone who wanted to be beside her children and the people she loved. The world remembers her for elegance, but those closest to her remember her for simplicity. When there was nothing left to prove, Audrey returned to the one place she had always wanted to belong, home and family. On January 20th, 1993, Audrey Hepburn died in her sleep at her home in Tolochanas, Switzerland, at the age of 63. There was no loud ending, no spectacle of grief displayed before the public. Her passing was as quiet as the way she had lived in the last years of her life. But do not let that silence fool you. Because Audrey's death did not just close the life of a legend, it also left behind an enormous emptiness inside the family. And the tragedy did not end at the funeral, because many years after Audrey Hepburn closed her eyes, the two sons she loved most stepped into a battle no one wanted to see. Audrey Hepburn's two sons took each other to court over their mother's memorabilia. The world remembers Audrey Hepburn as a symbol of elegance, but after she passed the legacy she left behind pulled her two sons into a prolonged legal battle. What is shocking is not that Sean Hepburn Farrer and Luca Dotti did not love their mother. On the contrary, both deeply respected Audrey. The problem is that the name Audrey Hepburn is not just a family memory. It is also a legacy with immense emotional and commercial value, so large that even touching it can cause fractures. This dispute has two clear layers. The first layer is the memorabilia Audrey left behind, including posters, costumes, jewelry, scripts, awards, and many items directly tied to her life. This is not simply a matter of dividing ordinary assets. In the family of an icon like Audrey Hepburn, every item carries both emotional and financial value. When an agreement on division could not be reached, the conflict gradually escalated to a level that could no longer be handled within the family. The second layer is even more complex, involving the rights to use the name, image, likeness, and brand of Audrey Hepburn. This is what turned the situation from a family matter into a battle over control of a legacy. In 2017, a foundation bearing Audrey Hepburn's name sued Sean, claiming he obstructed fundraising and exhibition activities related to his mother. That same year, Sean filed a counter-lawsuit, arguing that the foundation did not have unlimited rights to use Audrey Hepburn's name and image. According to Sean, those rights belonged to him and Luca, not to an organization that could exploit them. The most critical point of the story lies here. This is not just about who keeps which dress, which photograph, or which trophy. At a deeper level, it is about who has the authority to give the green light to the world of Audrey Hepburn after she is gone. Who has the power to decide whether an exhibition can take place? In other words, the two sons are not only disputing their mother's physical belongings, but also the right to touch the greatest invisible part she left behind. Even so, if the story is seen only as an ugly battle, that would still not be fair. Because both Sean and Luca have their own ways of keeping their mother alive. Sean wrote Audrey Hepburn, an elegant spirit, participated in documentary projects, and appeared in activities preserving the memory of his mother. Luca chose a different path. He wrote Audrey in Rome, Audrey at home, preserving Audrey's image in the kitchen within the family and in everyday life. This battle tarnishes the outward appearance of Audrey Hepburn's legacy, but it also proves a painfully deep truth. Audrey remains so great that even after her death, her name is still a world that even her own family cannot step into without carrying pain. And perhaps that is the most painful paradox of all. A woman who lived with such elegance ultimately left behind not only brilliance, but also a fracture within her own family. Audrey Hepburn, a film legend and a simple mother. There are two Audrey Hepburns that exist side by side in public memory. One, Audrey of the world, the woman who emerged from Roman holiday, reached the peak with an Oscar, became the soul of Breakfast at Tiffany's, and left her mark on film and fashion history as an irreplaceable icon. And another Audrey of the family, a woman who preferred staying home over attending parties, preferred cooking over making appearances, and always wished for her children to grow up normally. It is this dual existence that makes Audrey Hepburn complete. Many stars conquer Hollywood and then spend the rest of their lives protecting their spotlight. Audrey was different. She reached the peak very early, had everything a star of that era could dream of: fame, money, iconic roles. But at the most important turning points, Audrey repeatedly chose to step away from that rhythm, to hold on to family, children, and privacy. She did not see motherhood as a side part of life. For Audrey, it was the center. After her miscarriages, after unfinished love stories, after marriages that could not keep their original beauty, she still never gave up on the dream of a true home. And then, at the end of her life, when she could have lived as a legend, wrapped in comfort, Audrey used her name to step into the harshest places with UNICEF. There she was no longer the woman wearing Givenchy under camera lights. She was someone who knew what hunger felt like, who understood the feeling of a child waiting for aid, and now used her fame to draw the world's attention to the smallest and most vulnerable lives. That is why Audrey's legacy does not stop at cinema. It reaches another level, more enduring, quieter, and more human. Audrey Hepburn was not perfect. Her marriages failed. Her love life was marked by unfinished chapters. Her final years carried illness. After her death, her 2 sons even entered a legal battle over her memorabilia and the name Audrey Hepburn. But those very fractures make her appear not as a cold monument, but as a real human being, someone who loved, lost, endured, and still chose to live with kindness. In fact, those imperfections made her greater. That is why Audrey Hepburn's legacy is a dual legacy that few people have. On one side are films that are almost irreplaceable images that will live forever in cinematic history. On the other side is compassion, humanitarian spirit, and the role of a mother who tried to give her children a normal childhood in the middle of overwhelming fame. Audrey Hepburn did not just leave behind immortal roles. She also left behind a standard for how to live with depth, compassion, and dignity. So, in your opinion, what is Audrey Hepburn's greatest legacy, her timeless films, or the love she left for her family and for the children she tried to save?
This content is for informational and entertainment purposes only, thoughtfully compiled from public archives, historical records, and classic articles. While we strive for accuracy and balanced storytelling, some details from Hollywood's golden age remain unconfirmed and should be treated as speculative. We encourage viewers to draw their own independent conclusions. If this journey through Hollywood's shadows resonated with you, please leave a gentle like and subscribe with the bell icon so you never miss our next chapter. To continue uncovering the forgotten tragedies of the Golden Age, simply select the video on your screen right now. Thank you for keeping their memories alive.